The struggling and embattled Jose Mourinho is a living example of how coaching class is susceptible to inflation. The purpose of this video is to find out why one of the greatest managers of all time turned into almost a journeyman, though it's worth to emphasize that the Portuguese will retain his legendary status in the history regardless of how and when his career will end. Actually, the story of José's professional decline is a story about inflation of his main skills. The Portuguese's uniqueness lies in that he never didn't invent something particularly, formation, style of play or whatever, but definitely increased the level of coaching professionalism, like it did Giovanni Trapattoni in the 1980s and Fabio Capello in the next decade. Especially in terms of preparation. The young Mourinho's training sessions were well thought and intense and didn't contain anything extra. Mainly courtesy to those practices, José's teams were so remarkably consistent and resilient on the long runs. His Porto and Chelsea progressively established a new points scoring record in their respective leagues, but José's personal unbeaten home run is incredibly impressive even against this backdrop. During 9 years, the teams headed by the Portuguese were undefeated at home in the various leagues. This number is simply mind-blowing, bearing in mind how many stresses, obstacles and adversities the manager and his footballers went through. But the time has drastically changed, and nowadays the average level of coaches and their skills is significantly higher, which made the maestro, who aged a lot after years of grueling job, only one of many, probably even one of many now. Another undeniable Mourinho's strength at his peak was a prodigious work rate. His ability to focus on a target on a month-to-month basis was almost unparalleled, or rather on several targets, which was in the early 2000s something brand new. Even the greatest teams of the 1990s had a knack to neglect by one tournament out of 3 or 4. The great AC Milan under Capello's guidance, for instance, have never won the Italian Cup and even didn't participate in the final of this competition during their highly successful period. Marcello Lippi's Juventus were unstable in the same tournament. As for Manchester United of the early 1990s, Alex Ferguson's team, being extremely productive on the domestic arena, botched 5 European campaigns on the trot at the very same time. This shows how difficult it is to sustain a high level of performance on different fronts. Mourinho was basically the first one who has been able to do it constantly year by year. During his golden managerial years, the Portuguese squads were always in contention and always strived to win all. Indeed, it hasn't always happened, but there is no doubt that José, with his meticulous intensity and maximum attention to every little detail, was a benchmark there for a long time. It's significant that after his Porto's success, almost every second year, the team which won the Champions League made a hat-trick or at least a double of major titles. The problem is that Mourinho himself didn't do it for a while. His other very important asset was tactical flexibility, the quality he lost probably the most. Being equally well drilled and fairly comparable in terms of savvy, hunger and desire, José's best teams played differently. His Porto were good in possession, his Chelsea varied fast football with a pragmatic one, Inter in his tenure were tactically astute and extremely effective in slowing down the tempo, whilst Mourinho's Real were a fast-paced monster and scored the lion's share of their goals on the open pitch. Indeed, the Portuguese wasn't the first football coach who showed this type of qualities. We could recall the names of Lippi and Otmar Hitzfeld, but nobody before him hasn't showed this versatility so often and in so many different top leagues. But returning to England in 2013, Jose completely lost this gift. His next teams resembled each other with uncanny regularity. Very poor positional attack, the limited number of tactical moves, mediocre passing and perennial focus on defense. It's a universal painting of his Chelsea, Manchester United and the current Tottenham. While firstly Josep Guardiola and then Zinedine Zidane along with Jurgen Klopp changed the perception of attacking football, making it much more technical and sophisticated, Mourinho with his aesthetic approach stuck in the past and predictably lost the most head-to-head battles with them. His loss of the stature and authority is even more visible though. The fourth trait that has guided him to success time after time is, well, rather was, a firm contact with his team. Mourinho's ability to establish a family type of atmosphere and camaraderie within a collective was one of the keys to winning at Porto, Chelsea and Inter. But working at Real, he tangibly started to lose this asset. Why? Let's not forget that the difference in age with the passing of time became bigger and bigger. If at Porto and later at Chelsea and Inter, a veteran squad, Jose dealt with the footballers that were only 10, 12 or 15 years at worst younger than him, at Real this gap rose to 25 years. And now at Tottenham, a lot of players are younger than his children. It's evident that it's much more difficult to manage people with absolutely different mentality, intellect and interests. And in the past years, Jose ruled many times that the modern footballers are immature and lacking a work ethic. But the problem not only remains, it grows. Not the least due to a simple fact. Mourinho's results also deteriorated. He lost some of his worth and authority, and in those conditions, it's hard to be as demanding and firm as he used to be. The players don't listen to him as carefully as it was 10 years ago. In these circumstances, the Portuguese can only desperately fight for his future, for his reputation, and for his job as well. It's obvious that he could stay at Tottenham almost only by winning the Europa League, but it's a tricky task, given how strong is the competition. If he would be sacked, Jose hardly could find a managerial job in the other prestigious and ambitious club in the major leagues. He will probably have to move to China, USA or Russia. If the latter scenario will realize, it would be curious to see him at Zenit, in the club searching for a marquee-name manager with a rich European experience. Zenit also could offer Mourinho the amount of money he used to earn. On the other hand, maybe it's a proper time for him to switch to the international level and take over one of the national teams. It's not expected to be his native Portugal. Fernando Santos is honestly a better and cheaper manager now, and therefore his positions are almost unwavering. More feasible options for Jose, in my opinion, are Paraguay, Uruguay and Greece, the national teams that cultivated a pragmatic style of football in the last decades. Won't be surprised if Mourinho will bring one of these teams to Qatar at the World Cup. Obviously, he could also return to his familiar role of TV expert, but this capacity is always reserved for him. There is no doubt that Jose will stop his coaching activity only when he has absolutely nothing to give in this sense. Until that, he will work, fight and struggle with his usual high self-esteem, such are his worth and character.